Today I'd love to introduce you to a friend that we've gotten to know over the last 2 or 3 years. He's come to speak at our Character Combine. I think this was the 3rd year consecutive now that he's been a guest, and gives himself away to speak to young people and coaches. This man is a Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL. I thought one time to say former Navy SEAL, and I learned that's not the right way to say it, because once you're a Navy SEAL, you're always a Navy SEAL. It's just retired, not former. Don't ever say that. You get yourself in trouble. You don't want to get yourself in trouble with a Navy SEAL. I promise you that. Would you give a welcome today to David Goggins? Welcome, man. We really appreciate you coming and giving your life away to kids here in our city and coaches. It was a great day. You did amazing yesterday, too. Thank you for that.
I appreciate it, Rev.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
You had a kind of a rough start to life, as I understand it, and part of your story is overcoming things that sometimes I think people get into a place of thinking, you know, I had such a bad start. We start believing that we can't become anything more than what we were given in those early days. So it's helpful, I think, for people to get a context, because where you're at today is a far cry from where things started out. Can you explain a little bit of that, how things got started?
I will. Starting out, I was born in Buffalo, New York, and my dad owned a bar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Rick James or not. If you're not, the Dave Chappelle Show will get you familiar with it. But anyway, pretty much my dad helped Rick James get famous, and with that being said, my dad was a very abusive man. So my dad, I'll never forget one time watching him drag my mom down the stairs by her hair. It was so bad for me and my brother that, my mom had to write letters for us. So, we couldn't, do PE because we were so bruised up from getting beat. And my mom finally got the courage after my dad took everybody's soul in the house. My mom got the courage to finally move. And lucky for me, she moved to a small town called Brazil, Indiana. There's about 10,000 people there and only 3 black families. So the long and short of it was I got called nigger every day of my life. And I forget my first time I got my car and they spray painted nigger, we're going to kill you on it. So I'm trying to paint just a picture for you all to let you know that, you don't need much to be successful in life. So that's kind of how I started off.
With all of that challenge, that can just beat you down so much that it can change your whole sense of worth. Somehow you got through it. Do you know how? Like what gave you the ability to overcome that beginning?
Well, I wasn't very talented. I graduated 213 out of 214 my graduating class. I didn't go to school hardly at all because I got my, thank you very much, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. I didn't go to school very much because I was, constantly getting beat up and constantly getting bullied, so you become very insecure. And the one talent, and I call it a talent, it's a great gift that I do have, is I've always heard this voice in my head, and the voice was from God. And, all my insecurities, all my issues I had growing up, I was always led by God, and I never blamed God for all the horrible things I went through, from health issues to having a bad father, having being bullied, and I also went through a stage where I was 300 pounds and I was very large in weight, and I never blamed God for anything. So I give all the credit to just never putting blame on God, always owning up to who I am.
At some point you decided to go toward the military. If I understand it right, you're not only a Navy SEAL, but Special Ops in Army Ranger and something in the Air Force too?
Right. So I'm the only person in the history of the military that's been in special operations in the Air Force. I went through Army Ranger School. I was the honor man there. And I was the 36th African American to ever graduate Navy SEAL training in 70 years. So, thank you. But what's funny about that is that what drove me in that direction was I didn't want to do it. You guys heard just a piece of my story, and being a very insecure person, I blamed everybody for not going anywhere. I blame people for calling me nigger. I blame my dad for, for beating me. I blame my mom for not being there. Even though she was a good mom, in life, people have their own hurts and pains and struggles that they're going through. And as a young kid, you don't understand that, and you blame everybody for what you're going through. And it wasn't until I started blaming myself for blaming everybody else that I started becoming successful in life. But the one thing I say is that I never blame God. And I don't know why that is. I never blamed God or had woe was me. I call it poopy pants. For those of you who have kids out here, when the kid goes to the bathroom, they kind of walk around like this because they went to the bathroom in the pants. A lot of us adults walk around the same way because life isn't fair. Well, guess what? Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
And that's the message I learned.
Yeah. There's a turning point somehow where that lesson dawned on you, where you saw, I can change and not let what other people did control me. You stopped blaming them. You started blaming yourself for blaming them.
Right.
And then it changed you. Like you started getting ideas and dreams. How did you decide to pursue the military?
I'll never forget what happened to me. I was in Spanish class, and we keep our Spanish notebooks over in the corner. So I went over to get my Spanish notebook, went back to my seat, and I opened it up, and some kids got a hold of the Spanish notebook, and on the front cover of it, they had me hanging from a noose, from a tree. And they say, "Nigger, we're gonna kill you." And so I immediately left class, and I went right to the principal's office. And I showed the principal, and the principal looked at me, and he said, "Well, they're ignorant. They spelled nigger Niger."
Wow.
And I was like, wow, that's the best advice I can get. And I realized at that point in time, I was truly alone. I was insecure. I had no mentors. I had nothing. But I always had God. And I always knew I had this voice in my head. So I didn't like what I saw. At 16 years old, I started shaving my head. And I can lie to you all right now and tell you who I was, and I wasn't. But that image in the mirror never lies to you. And I knew the only way I can kind of fix who I was by kind of putting myself through the crucible of life. And the military became that crucible. I was terrified of jumping out of airplanes. I was terrified of shooting guns. I was terrified of my own shadow pretty much. And I wanted to get over that. And how I got over that was seeking the hardest things a human being could go through. And that's kind of what happened.
At one point, you had put on quite a bit of weight. Was that before the military pursuit?
So I was actually 300 pounds, and in that picture, I'm about 270. So what happened was I was in the Air Force.
Is that the same guy?
Yeah, I know. It's kind of crazy, right? It's like,
wow.
Got cool basketballs in my head there. But basically what happened was I was in the Air Force, and I was trying to be Air Force Special Operator, and I was almost through like I'm done with the training, and they found out I have sickle cell. Sickle cell disqualified me from being an Air Force Special Operator. So I fought it, went to Secretary of Defense. They allowed me back into training, and they said I got to start back from day one. I said, no way. I was scared of the water, didn't want to go back to the water again. So I gained all this weight and depression. At home, I was sitting back a year later, and I saw this show on the Discovery Channel of Navy SEALs going through Hell Week. And I talked about that accountability mirror. I said, you know what? I'm tired of being scared. Once again, I'm going right back to who I was back in high school. I was going back to who everybody said I was, and I didn't want to be that anymore. So I decided to go to the recruiter and say I want to be a Navy SEAL, looking like this. Oh, my fault, not looking like this.
Yeah.
Looking like the picture you saw. Long story short, the recruiter said I got to lose 105 pounds in like 60 days because I was almost too old to be a SEAL. You all know the story. I lost the weight, and I went on to go through three Hell Weeks, and I became a Navy SEAL.
Pretty amazing. Yeah. So most people, if they get through the training, is one Hell Week, right? Why
Right.
3? I mean, that's different too.
Once again, I've never blamed God, but God definitely has put it to me a couple times. So in SEAL training, you're only supposed to go through one Hell Week. I'm the only person in the history of Navy SEAL training in 70 years who's gone through 3 Hell Weeks. And I went through 3 Hell Weeks in 1 year, and some of you may not know what Hell Week is. Hell Week is the hardest training the military has to offer. It's 130 hours of continuous training. In the 130 hours, you might get 2 hours of sleep. And the whole idea of this training is to literally destroy a man, and once the man is destroyed, the training starts. So I was lucky enough to go through, it was only 1 year when this happened out of 70 years, and I was in that 1 year, praise God, where the commander was like, look, if anybody gets hurt or anybody fails something, we're gonna roll you back to day 1 of training. I don't care if you're the last week of training, and training is 6 months long. I'm gonna put you back to day 1. So what happened to me was Hell Week is the 5th week of training, and I got to somewhere in Hell Week and I got injured. Got rolled back to day 1. Day 1 of training. Went through, my second time going through, went through that complete Hell Week. I was getting ready to start the second phase of training. I'm all, happy because Hell Week's the hardest part of training. What happens? I mess up my leg. Go back to day 1 again. Start day 1 again. Made it through that Hell Week, and that Hell Week, it was so horribly cold in San Diego. We had a guy die of pulmonary edema. I got through, became a Navy SEAL, and gained all the weight back. That's to be continued.
Yeah. You've done lots of missions. How many years military have you served?
I did 21 years in the military. I did 4 in the Air Force. I did 16 as a Navy SEAL, and I worked with the Army for about a year. So 21 years total.
That's pretty awesome.
Thank you
for that. One of the things that we love are people like you who have served like you have. I mean, that's amazing sacrifice, and we're very military passionate. Like, that's a massive sacrifice you made so we could be here today. We got freedom to show up here because you sacrificed yours for all those years. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
In that mission where you went 21 years military, when you got out, you decided to pursue some other kind of crazy things.
Right.
Ultra running. How did you slip into that idea?
So if any of you guys out here are familiar with the book Lone Survivor, it's about a guy named Marcus Luttrell. I was in Buds for almost a decade, so, going through SEAL training for so long, I knew a lot of guys on this op. For some of you who don't know about this op, what happened was it was the worst incident in SEAL history. There was 4 guys doing an overwatch, and they got discovered by some people. And long story short, everybody died but Marcus Luttrell. And at this time, I was about 200 and some odd pounds, hadn't put running shoes on, and a lot of these guys had kids. So I wanted to raise money for these families, and the best way I could do it was I went online and found a foundation called the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. This foundation sends kids to college full tuition if your dad, who was a special operator, died in combat. So I found a great foundation, but I'm not a real smart person, so I Googled the 10 hardest events in the world. And I chose the very top one. And the very top one was this race called the Badwater 135. It's a 135-mile run through Death Valley in the summertime. Right, not real smart. So 135 miles, 130 degrees. I called the race director up, but I didn't think it was humanly possible for a person to run 135 miles at one time. So I thought it was a stage race. I thought you would go run like 20 miles, 15 miles, set up camp, little barbecue, whatever, and then you run again the next morning. So I called the race director up. He goes, hey, have you ever run 100 miles? And I said, in a calendar year? He goes, no, at one time, in 24 hours or less. I said, no. He goes, well, to qualify for Badwater, you got to run 100 miles in 24 hours or less. So I was like, I haven't even run past 20 miles in my life, and I haven't put running shoes on in over a year. And I called him up on a Wednesday. That Saturday was a 100-mile race called the San Diego One Day. You run around a 1-mile track for 24 hours, and my goal was to get 100 miles. So I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of it all, but a 200 and some odd pound man who doesn't go running at all, you can kind of imagine how it went. I ended up running 101 miles in 19 hours. I got done with the race. I called Chris Kosman up. Chris Kosman was like, I heard how bad off you were, and you're not ready for the hardest race in the world. So there's one more race I could do to kind of prove to Chris Kosman that I wanted to do this race to raise money. I had to show up to the start line of this race called the Hurt 100. The Hurt 100 is very fitting for this race because at the time only 27 people had completed the race. There's over almost 30,000 feet of climbing in a 100-mile race. So it's like the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest, and we're going to throw in 100 miles. So basically, I went to the start line of that race with cast on my feet, and I completed this race and went on to do the Badwater 135.
It's awesome. The reason for the cast on your feet was it that race the week before?
Right. So what I didn't tell you all is in my third Hell Week, when you go through one Hell Week, they say it takes 5 years off your life. So I guess I'm almost expired from this world right now. So basically, when I was going through my third Hell Week, I didn't have a lot of time to heal my body. So the CO, so the people in charge were like, hey, David, you know, this is your last time going through. So basically, my legs were broken starting Navy SEAL training for the third time. And what I realized was I had to literally get compression tape. And what compression tape is what athletes put on their ankles to keep their ankles from rolling. I put that on my feet all the way up to my calf muscle, and it kept my feet from flexing, so I kind of ran with my hip flexors. And the first hour of running would be so painful, but then my feet would go numb. And I was able to get through training that way. That's how I got through Navy SEAL training. So.
Nice. Yeah. Something you find you must have some unique capacity to turn off what your brain's telling you and go through the pain. How does that work?
Well, for me, you guys kind of heard a little bit about my life story about being afraid and you know, being insecure, and I used to lie to everybody about who I wasn't. And one thing I found out in my life once I started my journey is how amazing we are and how far we can go and how strong our mind is. But I found out through belief. You know, I never blamed God for anything, and I was very patient in my life, and I had true belief. A lot of us believe in God, but, you know, some of us kind of believe in God. When things go bad, we blame God. I had a true belief, and that true belief allowed me to go to a place in my mind that most people are afraid to go because it's painful. There's suffering involved, and there's questioning involved of why am I doing this? I was able to go to these dark places and find light, and I found myself in this journey. When I was so far away from myself, from blaming people, the second I started blaming myself, I found myself. So I have a way to kind of go inside and become a better person.
I was up in Washington State this week and thinking about being here today, knowing you were coming. And so I got a Fitbit this week, and I thought, you know, 10,000 steps a day, I should at least get started. You know, I haven't gotten very far between then and today, so
Roger
you're kind
that.
of intimidating, you know, to stand here with you. But
Roger that.
I'm on the journey here.
Hey, that's good.
Yeah?
That's good.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You know, 10,000 steps. It's all relative.
Okay.
200-mile running, 100, hey, it's all relative.
Well, I'm going to do it.
I love it. That's
Okay.
great.
Roger that, you have said. What does that mean to you? That's become kind of part of your life message.
So I say Roger that a lot. And I say Roger that because what I found out going through training, I've been in every single special ops training, from Delta Force to Rangers to Air Force Special Ops to Navy SEALs. Wherever hard is, let me go there so I can see who David Goggins is. And a lot of people quit because it really does suck. It is so hard and so miserable that it literally questions who you are as a man. So what I found out about people was what makes a person quit is they overthink a situation in front of them. So in BUD/S, SEAL training, the water temperature is very cold. It's the Pacific Ocean. It's freezing. You've been up all day, all night for 70-some hours, 80-some hours, and your mind is saying, why in the world am I doing this? The people who make it through training are the people who just say in their mind, roger that. So if the instructor were to tell me, hey, David, jump in that water, do a sugar cookie, do 1,000 push-ups, I didn't think about it because it sounds real stupid. You know, you think about it like, you know what, I'm not doing this. I'm going home, taking a hot shower, drinking some coffee, getting a nice donut, and I'm going to be comfortable. So when you think too much, you become very weak. And thinking is good, but sometimes thinking is bad. So I came up with this slogan of the Roger That mentality. The Roger That mentality, when somebody says do something, you just do it. You don't think about it. You say Roger that. You don't overthink it. And before you know it, that task is done. And you can go on with your life, and you didn't overthink it, and you become very successful. So with that being said,
Yeah.
Rev,
All right.
this is your shirt.
Sweet.
I appreciate it.
Roger that.
Here you go.
Thank you for that. That's cool. I feel like I should frame it or something and make
Hey,
it a life motto.
If
Roger
you wear
that.
it, Rev, you gotta represent it.
Okay, man. All right. Going back to your early days, I saw a picture of you in like a choir or something like that. And this theme we're talking about, he who started a good work in you, you're talking about God, was in your head way back from day one, even when it didn't make sense.
Right.
But you were hearing his voice. And you started out as a kid in Catholic church and in a choir. And all these years later, you're still that work in progress, but you're making amazing progress. What do you think of when you see this back to early days of your life?
Well, first of all, I don't know if you guys can pick me out in that picture or not. I mean, I'm kind of light complected, but if you can't see the little afro in the corner, you guys need to get some glasses.
Yeah.
But basically, what's funny about that picture is I remember I used to stutter real bad. I was so nervous and so afraid of everything. And I'll never forget how hard it was for me because this voice just annoyed me. Because my mom went around a lot, great woman, and my dad was so abusive, but this voice just kept on haunting me about what to do. And if I were to do bad, it would just stay there. And I'm like, gosh, just leave me alone. I'm so tired of taking the hard road. And the hard road was really God kind of guided me through my whole life. And the one thing I realized, everybody asked me, how in the world did you make it to where you're at today without having a mentor, not having all these great things that people think you need to have? You know, people think you need to have these great parents and money and a great education and great talent of athleticism and all that sort of stuff. And I realized, you know, I'm so glad that I didn't leave the voice, because the voice led me right to where I'm at today. As painful as it was to follow that voice and to always tell people when I messed up, I apologize and hold myself accountable, it was that very voice that led me here, and that voice was God. So I give all credit to God, and that was it.
That's awesome. Yeah. It sounds like you've been saying Roger that to God all these years too. When he shows you something to do, you go.
It's very true.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming and being a part yesterday, pouring your life into kids that are being formed into who God wants them to be. I believe you've made a difference in inspiring them to think different, to listen to that voice. And what lies ahead still, who knows? God knows. But as a work in progress like we all are, I can just picture even greater impact of what you're doing, who you are. The spirit that's in you is really attractive. It's like inspires me. I feel inspired just standing next to you today. I want to thank you for that.
I appreciate
and
it.
for all of us to just get more of the sense of who God is through how you followed him in your journey.
Thank
you
you.
for that.
And one thing, I remember this, everybody, all you need is a breath of air. I talked to a bunch of people who've been blown up, buddies of mine who have no legs, and everybody wants to know, you know, find your 100%. Whatever it's not my 100%, it's your 100%. Whatever you are, find your 100%. All you need is a breath of air to be great. You don't need a lot of talent. You don't need anything. So I appreciate it, Rev. Thanks a lot.
Navy SEAL David Goggins.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.